Good evening, everyone. Everyone be able to hear? Good volume today, huh? Hey, how about this weather? It's a lot better than 2 or 3 days ago when it was 90 degrees or so. Pretty hot. So welcome to Founders Day, at least the beginning of Founders Day. And there's more of Founders Day the next couple of days, as you know. You've seen all the advertisements, things been in the paper. There have been flyers around and on the radio, so lots of activities. This year it's on State Street. Wide variety of activities for all ages, so come and join the fun Friday and Saturday. There's face painting for kids. There's a car show. Let's see, beanbag toss, barbecue cook-off. So there's just lots of activities for all ages. So come in and join the fun. So everyone seated should have a flyer concerning Call Vault. And you're going to hear a little bit more about that restoration project in our next segment of the program tonight. So tonight is the, of course, Heritage Award and Voices from the Past. And I just want to give a little history of the Heritage Award. This was envisioned by Midge Andreessen in 2004 through the organization of AAUW, the American Association of University Women. And this was to create a process to recognize individuals for their commitment and dedication to our community. So the nominations are based on the following criteria: service to our local community, service to our county, service to our state, and even service beyond that. So along with the service then is also offices that are held locally, offices held within the county, within the state, and even beyond that. And the nominations can be from individuals, organizations, or groups. So if you know someone who's deserving of this Heritage Award, just submit the name to the Heritage Award Committee by calling the Chamber of Commerce. Now the Chamber of Commerce is not the award committee, but it's composed of a member of each of the following organizations, and many of them are represented up here right now. So there's AAUW, and they're going to introduce themselves in a little bit. But AAUW, Founders Day Committee, Lions Club, the Morwins Kiwanis, Noon Kiwanis Club, Rotary, and the Seroptimus. So some of the recent past recipients that have been honored are Jenny Buchanan, Howard Amdahl, Ralph Lindhorst, Dolores Mertz, Jane Nettleton, and Father Cecil Friedman. Many more. I believe there's been 22 all total. I just went up the last few years. So as you can see, these recipients have touched many lives in a variety of ways and have had a far-reaching impact with their involvement and their activities. So with that, then I will start with Vicki. I think we're just going to introduce ourselves and what organization that we're with. And I'm Rick Murphy. I'm with the Morwins Kiwanis Club.
Thank you, Rick. I'm Vicki Mallory, and I'm representing the Founders Day Committee.
Kathy Nelson, President of the Kiwanis Club of Algona. Angie Albert, and I'm representing the Seroptimus Club of Algona.
Blair Rendinas with the Algona Rotary Club.
Mark Palmer with the Algona
Morwins Kiwanis Club. And for those of you who say, what in the world is a Morwins? It means early morning. That's why our group gets there about 6:30 to 6:45, so we can start at 7 o'clock.
Hello, I'm Laura Gabor, representing the American Association of University Women, Algona chapter. The American Association of University Women had the honor of nominating Greg and Julie Buchanan for the posthumous Heritage Award. We are here today to present their families and loved ones with those awards. Both Greg and Julie dedicated their lives in service to Algona, Kossuth County, and the state of Iowa. Greg as an attorney and Julie as a longtime area educator. Both were committed members of Algona, Kasuth County, and Iowa, dedicating their lives in service to their communities. Greg graduated from Drake University Law School as the valedictorian. He was invited to be a member of the Drake University Law Review, where he served as case editor. Following his graduation, Greg was awarded a prestigious internship, serving as the law clerk for Iowa Supreme Court Justice Ward W. Reynoldson, doing extraordinary work together. Throughout their lives, he remained close to Justice Reynoldson and his fellow clerks. Greg returned to his hometown to join the law firm started by his uncle, Russ Buchanan, where he practiced for more than 40 years. His practice included tax preparation, estate planning, probate, banking and business, and nonprofit tax-exempt applications, tax filings, and advisory services. His work with local banks during the farm crisis helped several banks and many farmers survive the unprecedented crisis. His expertise and advisory services regarding nonprofits and tax-exempt entities is arguably his most lasting legacy to our communities. Greg quietly, humbly, and selflessly served these nonprofits, helping to establish them and enabling them to grow to their current presence in the community and tremendous impact thereon. Greg became known throughout the state as an expert in the area of nonprofit, tax-exempt entities, working to complete applications for tax-exempt status, completing nonprofit tax filings, and serving as an advisor to numerous nonprofit tax-exempt entities. He was known in the community for his substantial and selfless efforts to these nonprofits, including being a driving force for the Hoink Foundation, the Mahana Congregational Church Scholarship Foundation, the Kasuth County Community Foundation, and the Algona Community School Foundation. For many years, Greg and Dave Shumway managed the investment portfolio of the Algona Community School Foundation, helping to nurture, protect, and grow it to the substantial foundation that it is today. Greg was a Legacy Award winner for the Kasuth County Community Foundation. Julie and Greg Buchanan were married more than 50 years. They first met while they both attended the University of Iowa. Julie began her teaching career in Des Moines after they were married and while Greg attended law school at Drake University. Julie Buchanan was a special teacher. She taught and loved junior high students and briefly taught high school English, but her true passion was teaching the students who learned better outside of a traditional classroom setting. She taught for many years at East Fork Alternative High School, where she eventually became the principal, obtaining her MA in educational leadership. She loved her students, and they in turn loved her. She was an advocate for them and a voice when they often did not have another for them. Her dedication and conviction to her students, and in providing them with an alternative to the traditional classroom setting, was contagious and inspirational. She selflessly served their needs in the classroom and beyond. She was proud to see her students grow and become happy, fulfilled adults. Julie was a member and president of PEO. She served, delivered Meals on Wheels, and spearheaded many community service projects. Julie and Greg hosted and opened their hearts and home to several foreign exchange students over the years. Julie and Greg were members and officers of the First Congregational United Church of Christ. Greg was a longtime member of the Algona Rotary Club, American Bar Association, and Iowa State Bar Association. I'm an accountant, if you know me, and we aren't known as great orators or for being particularly loquacious, but I did want to add a few words of my own. Greg and Julie shared their knowledge, talents, expertise, and gifts with Algona, its surrounding communities, the county, and indeed the state. They used their keen intellect, razor wit, occasional irreverence, but always their hearts to often quietly and always without concern for recognition or even compensation to accomplish great works. They have left a legacy of good from which our communities will continue to benefit for so very many years to come. We are here today to thank them for their many and several contributions to our schools, organizations, businesses, and charities, and to show our appreciation for all of their great works and contributions. I only wish that we could have thanked them with the presentation of these awards in person. Meredith and Jeff. This is Meredith Hines Buchanan, or Buchanan Hines, Greg and Julie's daughter, and this is their son, Jeff Buchanan. Thank you for sharing your parents with us. It has been an honor to know them.
like I'm going to repeat many of the things, the kind things that Laura just shared. When they told me I had to speak, I had to definitely get it written down. The strange thing about all this is how much they would not be thrilled about it. I mean, they wanted to do the works, but they were not people who wanted to be in the center of things. So, but we certainly appreciate it. So as I was going through all of their things in the last couple of months, I ran across this, which some of you may find familiar. Scott Buchanan, I know I sent it to you recently. So it read this: his gifts to the community were many. He was an avid investor. He voraciously read many publications, educating himself on investments, and eventually developed his own theories. Instead of merely investing his own funds, he put his unique skills to work on behalf of many Algona nonprofits. Without compensation or even reimbursement of his expenses, he worked for more than 20 years investing millions of dollars for numerous local charities, regularly outperforming professional managers. He served as an unpaid advisor to other local charities in managing their investments. He spent thousands of hours in his work, and as a direct result, those charities gained millions of dollars from his efforts. Many of those dollars benefited Algona High School students and their parents through increased scholarship money. Through his expertise, he grew most of these portfolios so well that they've been able to give away more than their original funding while still growing beyond their original size. He would not approve of this tribute because he rejected any recognition of his efforts, and nothing gave him more pleasure than seeing the results of his efforts in the form of large financial gifts to local students. His reward was in those gifts. That was actually not a tribute that was written about my dad. It was written by my father, about his good friend Dave Shumway, who he did a lot of these projects with. And as I read those words that he wrote about his friend, I decided that they were pretty appropriate for him to, especially that last part about his reward was in watching the local students receive those gifts. And then I tried to think about what to say about Mom, and I thought, well, a lot of that still applies. Her investments were different. Her investments weren't in spending time investing funds. Her investments were in time. She invested time in Meals on Wheels, as Laura had shared. And whether it was investing funds or investing time, serving on committees or delivering Meals on Wheels, even when she shouldn't have been after she had been ill herself, and I think my brother and I had to demand that she stop for a while. Otherwise, we were going to start making phone calls. Investing time in church projects or investing in the growth of students far beyond their years within the classroom. They invested heavily into the community. And though their reward was seeing others enjoy the fruits of their investments, and in knowing that they've invested in ways that will help to continue build this community for years to come, my family and I are very grateful to accept the recognition in their honor today. Sorry. And we look forward to watching their contributions help the community continue to grow. Thank you very much.
She's the orator. I am my parents' son, so what that means is when my dad got the Legacy Award, my mom called us up, and the day after, so there's some pictures of the award your dad got you didn't know about. And so I will basically say it this way. They will be very happy they got this, but as my sister said, my dad would hate it, hate the recognition, and my mom would say, this is really neat. And so I think that's the best way to lead.
Congratulations to the Buchanans. This time I'd like to introduce Mark Holmer, who has another Heritage Award presentation.
Good evening. It is a beautiful evening that God has given to us. Just introduce myself. I'm Mark Holmer. I've been living in Algona now for 20 years. I served as pastor of First Lutheran Church, and I'm currently serving at St. Thomas Episcopal Church. And it's been a wonderful thing to be here. We came from a community of 300,000, which is the Quad Cities. We came to Algona with a community of 5,000. We said, oh, we're going to go home soon. Not at all. We love this particular place. We feel that we could really make this our wonderful home. I've been pleased to be invited to become part of the ones who choose out those persons who are going to have to receive the Heritage Award. Been on that same committee now for a few years, and it's always been a really delight to sit down and consider a variety of people. This past time, which was just about a month ago, we did not have one doubt about who we wanted to nominate for this particular situation. So it got kind of ramrodded right on through by all 6 of us, and we were really delighted they voted unanimously to pick this particular person. I'm tempted to tell you that person's name, but I think once I start, you're going to know who that person is, because sadly, he and his spouse could not be here today. They had other things they had to do, but we're just going to go ahead and talk about this particular person who's made a significant impact on this area for the last 42 years. The person with whom I'm talking about received his license in 1979 to begin his work. His undergraduate university was a Bachelor of Science degree in 1974, medical school at the University of Iowa in 1978, residency at the Des Moines Medical Education Program in Davenport, Iowa. Certificate as American Board of Family Practice from 1981 until currently, and he has done a lot of things with advanced cardiac life support and advanced trauma support. His work experience, he's the Mercy Family Care Network, the Cousouche Regional Health Center from June of 1981 to the very present. That's 40 years of service as a medical doctor. His hospital appointments have basically been here alone. Just a few things about his professional activities. He's been president of the Kossuth County Medical Society, secretary of the Kossuth County Medical Society, chief of staff of the Kossuth County Hospital, president of Kossuth Regional Health Center, medical director, ambulance service, etc. How many of you got an idea who this person is? A few hands are up. That's pretty good. In the health system, he's been the executive committee chairperson for the Mercy Family Care Network. He has been a North Iowa Physician Hospital Organization Board. He's served as the North Iowa Mercy Health Center System Board member as well. I just did 3 out of 9 things that he's done. Statewide, he's been part of the Iowa Academy of Family Physicians. He was the Iowa Family Physician of the Year in 2004. He's part of the Iowa Medical Society and still is, even now in his semi-retirement. He was an IMS lobbyist for the Iowa State Senate Committee, chairman of the Medical Services Committee, Speaker House of Delegates, Iowa Medical Society. He's also a person been very active in the Wellmark Health Plans Board of Directors and chairman of the Wellmark Health Plans Board of Directors from 2003 to 2012. How are we doing on names? You coming up with that yet? Good deal. All right. Among other things, on a national basis, he was member of the Omicron, he is still an Omicron Delta Kappa Honor Society, nominated for the National Family Physician of the Year in 2005. Change the page. His community involvement includes president of the Algona Family Recreation Center from 1981 to 95, chairman of the Algona Family YMCA Board in 1996. I'm skipping a lot of things. Co-chair of fundraising committee of the Algona Family YMCA, helping to raise that kind of money. Fundraising committee for the Algona, fundraising again for the Algona Family YMCA at a later time. Among his own things that he is doing, he is extremely active in Worship and Music Committee at First Lutheran Church, and he is the chairman of the Building Improvement Committee at First Lutheran Church and was during its construction, a place that I have also served. And, this may be the dead giveaway, he's a member of the Algona Pilots Association. Getting it now? All right. So it's with pleasure. Oh, I should go ahead and finish this. He retired from KIRC, but came out of retirement, started working 3 days a week in Britt, Hancock, and Memorial Hospital Clinic. Thursdays, he's at KRAC doing stress tests, flight physicals, and DOT exams. Fridays, he attends a few other things. All right, do you know what his name is? Yep. Somebody shout it out. Dr. Moss. He is one incredible person. Dr. Moss, let's give a round. Kenton has been one of those people that just does the right thing at the right time. And he's a person who really has personality, a person who takes time for other people. And I know when I've occasionally visited him in the doctor's office, he's an incredibly wonderful person. Now in semi-retirement, he can't quit, so he's over in Grit and a couple other places and serving as a physician over there, and I can't blame him. I also understand that sometimes if you love the job that you do, it ain't work, and so you continue to do it. That's the situation with me. I turned 79 this year and haven't quit ministry yet. So let's give a round of applause for Dr. Kenton Moss, MD, for the fact that he is this year's 2021 Heritage Award winner.
Thank you, Pastor. Well, it's time to move on to Voices from the Past, part of our program. So it's an honor for me to introduce someone who needs no introduction. He was a driving force of Founders Day, and Lynn Keek is going to introduce the Voices from the Past and tell us about Call Vault. Lynn.
And if you didn't know this about Dr. Moss, he was a conference high school wrestling champion, qualified for the state tournament, quite an athlete in his day. And guess what Britt Hancock Memorial Hospital has done? When he retired, would you give us 6 months? He did. Could you give us 6 more months? He is. And the latest proposal they've made to him, I just talked to him a couple days ago, and they want him to stay 3 years now. And he doesn't know how to say no. You know, that's the kind of a person he is. So, did he retire really? No. It was my pleasure, 22 years ago, I met with Vicki Mallory, and we were trying to think of a new thing we could bring to Algona, some event that would be fun. So Vicki and I put our heads together and came up with this concept of Founders Day. And I spent my time and my research on Asa and Ambrose Call and all of their families. Well, over the years, we've tried to add something new almost every other year at least. And this whole concept now, we're in our 9th year of doing the Voices of the Past. And a big thank you. Any members of the AAUW? Raise your hand, let's give them a hand. They are doing all the work during the winter months, along with the Kossuth County Genealogy Society. Members of that, they're doing research, they're doing typing, they're doing whatever. I was blessed as mayor. Mary Coleman was my secretary. I could ask her to do anything, and she always came through. Well, this lady over here in the straw hat, I met her 9 years ago. Talk about using battery power. I hope not. Brand new. I'll hurry up then. This whole concept of maybe doing something out in the cemeteries and not only honoring the Call family, but spreading out who we honor. And that's this event tonight to do so. Our 4 presentations tonight will include some local women, 2 local women who were early suffragists. 1920 is when Iowa passed a law that women could vote. Now to all of us that seems like so long ago, but in the scheme of things, that's just 101 years ago, 1920. So that's one of your presentations. A group of women who were actually the first to vote in Algona in 1920 are being represented by the actors and actresses tonight. Then we have a local undertaker, and we have a U.S. Senator and his wife. So those are what you'll be visiting. I'll call Gene up here. We'll want to divide you into equally sized groups. You'll be spreading out and doing kind of a rotation. So Gene, why don't you come forward? And how would you like the group to do this?
I got one short advertisement before we do that. Our Genealogy Society has compiled a book called A Telephone and a Typewriter, which is a collection of feature stories by Evelyn Cady, who was a longtime news reporter and columnist for the 2 local newspapers. You're actually going to meet Evelyn tonight along one of the stops. We are selling the books as a fundraiser, with the proceeds going toward the new history genealogy room in the soon-to-be completely renovated Algona Public Library. The majority of the stories in the book have a local history theme and are short and easy to read, written in Evelyn's own unique style. We hope you'll consider supporting our efforts by buying a book. You'll find them available for purchase by the front gate. And there's even special pricing for Founders Day weekend. The book sales will continue Friday and Saturday at the Welcome Center in downtown Algona from 10 to 3, where we'll be featuring an exhibit on the Call Opera House. So I hope you'll stop by. It was the premier entertainment venue in its day, and Evelyn Cady was a frequent performer there as well. So please stop in and see us at the Welcome Center. So now we're going to divide up into our groups. Okay.
I made a change. I'm going to open the Asa All Crypt, but I knew that with this presentation tonight and then the 4, it's going to get about to be 8 o'clock and anymore, not trusting the weather, I'm not going to open it tonight. I will be here Sunday at 3 o'clock. We're having a repeat performance of the Voices of the Past for anybody that didn't make this particular thing. So if Sunday afternoon is open to you, drive on in, 3 o'clock, down where the Asa Call Crypt is. We're going to open it up and we'll do a little of the history, who is all in the crypt. It's like looking into a mortuary room. They're in like rectangular pull-out type drawers for the actual bodies, okay? So that won't happen tonight. That will be happening at 3 o'clock Sunday afternoon right here.
One more thank you, I forgot. We want to thank the Founders Day Committee and Haggard Too Good Charitable Trust for their generous grants, which allow us to present this evening free of charge. So big thank you to them and to our guides and our actors. Okay, so we're going to divide up into 4 fairly even-sized groups. Please bring your chairs with you when you come. We have 4 guides. They are Sue Berry, Jennifer Harrington, Kathy Gerber, and myself. And we're going to take you to the different spots. And if you stay with your group, you'll see all 4 presentations tonight. So kind of divide up, and the guides will be along the road there, and just follow along. Thank you. Oh, and there will be cookies and lemonade at the front gate.
Thanks.
Constitution, and on until 1920, women of all races, creeds, education, and income levels worked without ceasing to gain this precious right. Some of our voices from the past speakers this year tell their stories of advocating for women's rights to vote, or talk about their first experience of voting in a presidential election. So if you guys want to follow me, we will be going to our first stop right over here.
Welcome this evening to this lovely spot that I now call home. It's wonderful to have you here on this beautiful evening. This cemetery has a special place in my heart because during my occupation as a mortician, I visited here many times. My name is Warren Laird, and I operated under an undertaking business in Algona for over 30 years. I brought many of my friends and neighbors to their final resting places here. I first came to Kossuth County in 1888. My uncle, J.R. Laird, was living in Algona at that time, and my father desired to move closer to his brother, so he rented a farm. I was newly married, and my wife and I decided to follow my father to Algona. I farmed nearby a few years and did odd jobs. My uncle ran a furniture store, and an undertaking business was also part of that enterprise. I helped there occasionally. It was quite common in those days to combine the furniture and funeral businesses, as most funerals were held from homes and there was no need for a chapel in those days. I actually found the mortician trade profession to be very interesting. And so I took training, became a licensed embalmer and undertaker in 1900. Shortly thereafter, I went to work full-time at my uncle's establishment. In 1911, I opened my own business solely dedicated to to the undertaking enterprise. Keeping up with the latest developments in the business was very important to me. I did some experiments on deceased animals to test the quality of embalming fluids, including one of my own manufacture, which proved to be superior. I also held a patent on a cement vault that I designed that did not leak. For many years, I owned the only automobile hearse in the whole county. It was precisely built to my own specifications and also served as an ambulance as needed. I was on call 24 hours a day. I was elected county coroner in 1912, a position I held for many years. In those days, anyone could run for that position. You did not have to be a doctor. My job was to investigate any questionable death and to convene an inquest if the facts justified them. This position was unsalaried, but I was paid by the hour for the performance of my duties. It actually was a pretty good fit with my undertaking business, as I quite often was called to the scene of an unexplained or accidental death anyway to take care of the earthly remains. As you might imagine, I was present at some gruesome scenes over the years. I almost always called an inquest when a suspected suicide was involved, as it was usually easier for the family to accept the decision of a panel of people rather than to take my word alone. But there were several murders also that demanded my attention during that time. In 1916, I purchased some business property on South Dodge Street and built a fine new building there to house my business. Some of you may recall it as the McCullough Funeral, as my partner, W.G. McCullough, purchased it from me in later years. I had also become the government weather observer, which I enjoyed very much. I was vigilant in recording the weather and provided my reports to the local newspapers as well. While my business life was successful at that time, my personal life was not. After 20 years of marriage, my relationship with my wife had become unbearable. I finally reached the breaking point and filed for divorce in 1917. It was a dark time for me. Little did I know that an even darker time was ahead, not only for me, but also for Kossuth County, the nation, and the whole world. In 1917, the United States entered into World War I. As the war was raging in France, influenza, commonly called the Spanish flu, began to spread across the globe. It arrived in the U.S. in 1918, beginning in the large cities and in the Navy and Army training bases, where hundreds of thousands of young Americans were being trained. In September of that year, the first of our local servicemen who died from the disease was shipped back for burial. At first, those funerals were held in churches with full services and large crowds gathered to honor these folks. It soon became apparent, as the flu quickly began to spread throughout the county, that more precautions needed to be taken to stop the outbreak. Funerals were moved to homes and eventually to front yards and then to graveside services. Finally, just to quiet burials with almost no one present but the funeral director and the cemetery workers. The first person to die of Spanish flu that fall in Algona was Emma Johnson, who joins us here today.
In October of 1918, I was a widow living in Algona with my parents, Ernest and Minnie Hoppy, along with my 3 children, Wilfred, age 9, Mildred, 7, and Bernice, who was 3 years old. My husband Pete had died on May 29, 1917, from pneumonia. A few weeks before his death, we had traveled to Iowa City to seek treatment for some liver trouble he was suffering with. We believe he contracted pneumonia while we were there. After Pete's death, I moved in with my parents. My mother had been in poor health for many years, so I became both housekeeper and caregiver. My grief over the loss of my husband made it difficult to carry on with life. But my children needed me, and so that gave me a reason to get up every morning. By the fall of 1917, the two older children had enrolled in school, and we had settled into a routine. Everyone, of course, was aware of the war in France, and most of us knew of a family who had a son that was either fighting or training to fight. It was a very patriotic time. I had heard talk of the Spanish flu, but to be honest, I hadn't really given it much thought. I was busy caring for my family, and I wasn't aware of any local cases. On October 10th is when I began to feel ill. I had high fever and chills, so I took to my bed. The doctor was called, and I was advised to remain in bed and get as much sleep as possible, as much rest as possible. Despite the care of the doctor and my family, pneumonia developed. It became very difficult to breathe, and as I struggled to take each breath, it felt almost like I was drowning. It became too much for me, and on October 16th of 1918, I passed away, leaving my children as orphans.
Yes, Emma's funeral was one of the saddest that I remember. It was our first experience with how quickly influenza could snuff out the life of a young, healthy person. Our hearts were broken for the three small children who had lost their parents in such close succession. One of my close neighbors here at Riverview is Robert Dodds, who also died during that epidemic. I've asked him to share his story.
I'm a Kossuth County native, having been born in 1885 in Union Township. I was the son of William and Nancy Dodds. I grew up on the farm and began farming in the home place with my brother Will after our parents moved to Algona. I married Eva Taylor in 1908, and we had a son, Homer, who was 8 years old in 1918. In December of that year, our friends, Mr. and Mrs. William Palmer, were staying with us when one by one we began to become ill. Coughing, high fever, chills, achiness, those were some of our symptoms. Each of us suffered varying degrees of the illness, but gradually we all began to improve. That is until I started to experience sharp chest pain and difficulty breathing. Influenza has a tendency to attack the lungs, causing inflammation, leading to pneumonia or other respiratory illnesses. For me, it was pleurisy. With little in the form of treatment for my ailment, my last hours on this earth were in horrific pain. Pain in my chest increased with each breath, and my struggle finally came to an end on the evening of Wednesday, December the 11th. My funeral was held at our home, and my body was brought here for burial. Now, as soon as he learned of my death, my brother Richard left home in the Des Moines area to attend my funeral. And during his journey here, he became ill with influenza, and upon arrival at my mother's home, immediately went to bed. Now, despite the tender care of our mother and his own wife, Richard died 10 days after my death and was buried here in another section of the cemetery. He was survived by his wife Susan and their daughter Audrey, who was 6 years old.
One of my saddest days was on November 11th, 1918, commonly called Armistice Day. While the whole country celebrated the end of the war that day, I was called to tend to the body of 5-month-old Dorothea Blanchard, who had died from the flu. The parents were so heartbroken, and I felt I was unable to give them any comfort. Having lost my own child as an infant, I easily identified with their sorrow. The epidemic lasted 6 months and took the lives of about 150 Kossuth County citizens. For those of us who served the families of the deceased, it was at once the busiest and yet the most melancholy 6 months of our lives. There was a bright spot for me personally in 1919. I had been seeing Delia Brown, and that year we were married. In 1920, we became the parents of a beautiful little girl we named Elizabeth. At the ripe old age of 57, I became a father again. Little Betty was the light of my life. Perhaps because I was at such an advanced age when Betty was born, I did my best to become an attentive father. I recruited several partners through the years in the business so that I could have more time off. We often spent time in the summer at her cottage on Clear Lake, and I loved attending Betty's school programs and recitals. In the early 30s, my health began to fail. I suffered several heart attacks, and in October of 1936, I became confined to my home, where I died November 25th, with Delia and Betty at my side. Eventually, Betty married and moved to New Jersey, and Delia later moved out there to be closer to her and our 4 grandchildren. When Delia passed in 1979, at the age of 89, she was laid to rest beside me.
Thank you. Okay. So, on July 2nd, 1919, Iowa had a special session of the legislature to ratify the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution. The one that states that, quote, the rights of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex, end quote. It passed unanimously in the Iowa Senate. Only 5 in the Iowa House dissented. It is important to remember at that time, the legislature was composed entirely of men. Tennessee was the last of the necessary 36 states to ratify the 19th Amendment, doing so by only 1 vote, 50 yes votes out of 99 members, on August 18, 1920. The amendment was officially ratified on August 26, 1920, when the Secretary of State received the registered letter from Tennessee. So that's the next step in suffrage. Ready whenever you guys are.
All right. I just have such good memories of Algona. Growing up here with my parents, Ambrose and Nancy Call, and I had 4 big sisters, and my twin Roscoe and I, and we were at the end of the family, so we were maybe a little bit spoiled. My dad was one of the founders of Algona with his brother Asa Call. But being a member of the Call family meant that you had to learn good manners and social graces and to seek higher education.
Now my early years were quite different than yours. My dad was a Civil War vet, and after the war, him and his wife settled on a farm in Derby, Iowa. That's down southeast of Des Moines a ways. Now we come from 12 generations of farmers, so it's definitely in my blood, and I spent a lot of time doing farm chores and milking the cows. In high school, I got a job at the local hardware store to make a little extra money. And then at college, I went off to Cornell at Mount Vernon. And after 2 years, I took a break and went to Des Moines Business School to study stenography. The shorthand skills I learned there helped me back at Cornell to finish my schooling there. And then I was off to the University of Iowa Law School. Now, when I graduated there, I came to Algona after passing the bar and started a law practice with my college pal, Tim Harrington.
Oh, I remember hearing the local gossip about 2 good-looking young attorneys coming to Algona. When I came home from college on break, I found out that that gossip was true. Oh my goodness. You know, tall, broad-shouldered, good-looking, and friendly. I could see why all the girls' hearts were at Twitter. I bet you can see that too. I loved that you had a broad smile and a hearty laugh, and even your nickname, Dick, was cute. Of course, that all changed to LJ for Lester Jesse when you opened your law practice.
Well, I have to say, after seeing you, I knew you were the right one for me.
Oh.
When I learned you were the daughter of Ambrose Call, I was afraid I wouldn't have enough to offer, though. I was so poor that Tim and I were living in our law office because we couldn't afford another place to live. You know, back then, that first year, I think we only made $200.
Oh my goodness, only $200? Did you really believe you weren't good enough for me? Oh, I never gave that a thought. After getting to know you, I had no doubts that you were going to be very successful in whatever career that you choose. And I gotta say, after seeing him that second lieutenant uniform when he joined the National Guard, oh my goodness, I was just smitten.
I was delighted when you accepted my proposal. I remember so clearly our wedding on August 21st, 1901, at your parents' home.
It was a beautiful ceremony, but not without incident. On the way to the wedding, there was a big thunderstorm, and your parents were in horse and carriage going west on State Street, and they crashed into a bus, which caused the wheel on the carriage to fall off, and both of them were thrown out of the carriage. Well, they only had cuts and bruises, but still, they felt like they couldn't come to the ceremony. You know, I even feel bad yet today that they couldn't be there at our wedding. Fortunately, my sister, Florence Cowles, and her husband Garner hosted us a few days later, and they were able to come to the reception.
The following years, my practice grew, and so did the family. Our son, Call, actually Levi Call, was born in 1905, and daughter Ruth 2 years later. In addition to practicing law, I was glad to serve as the Algona City Clerk from 1900 to 07, and was elected county attorney until 13 after that. During these years, I developed quite an interest in politics and began looking for an opportunity for higher office.
In 1917, the opportunity presented itself and you were ready. You declared your candidacy for the Congress from the 10th District as a Republican when incumbent Frank Wood's seat came up for election. In 1918, the World War I was kind of drawing to a close, and Congressman Wood had a poor voting record with the supporting our military. You campaigned hard on this issue against him in the primary and received many endorsements from district newspapers.
The local area showed unwavering support. Even area Democrats cast their vote in my favor, hoping to have a local man represent them in Washington. My primary victory over the incumbent was the upset of the election and made news headlines throughout Iowa. I then defeated my opponent in the November election and became the U.S. Congressman from the 10th District of Iowa, winning every county except for Carolyn Crawford, and there I only lost by 4 votes.
Oh my goodness. On any day of the week, except for Saturday, but sometimes on Sunday, at Washington, they would have teas for senators' wives. And Mrs. Dawes, the vice president's wife, had a lovely formal tea where she had these beautiful, exquisite lace tablecloth, and then on that table they were huge silver bowls filled with pink roses. At another tea that I attended, they had the American flag made out of candles, even the stars and the stripes, and then when they lit that, it was just stunning. And it was considered quite an honor to actually pour at these teas. I'll never forget, though, the wealthy, older Washington women, they would just show up in the most outrageous outfits. Oh my goodness. And their hats. They would wear hats that didn't even have a brim, and they put some, lace or just, some ticky-tacky stuff on the front, and then they take big old plumes and wrap them around the band, and then they put a gaudy old flower about 4 o'clock. Oh, I could never get used to that.
Now, I served 6 terms in Congress, the last 3 alongside my cousin Frank from the 2nd District. I was mentioned as a dark horse candidate in the for vice president in the election of 1924.
You beat another incumbent when you ran for the Senate in 1930, defeating Daniel Steck by a margin of 50,000 votes. While in the U.S. Senate, you became an outspoken opponent to the New Deal. You were always a very, very staunch Republican, and it was said the best government is no government. Keep it out of your life, and if you have to have it, keep it as close to home as you can find it. I remember chuckling when I heard you described as a loud, earnest orator after your keynote address in 1932 at the Republican National Convention, as that reporter certainly described you well.
One little anecdote that I always chuckle about when I think about it, there was a very prominent Iowa publisher by the name of Earl Hall who ran the Mason City Globe Gazette. And he told this story that appeared in the press. He said he was sitting in the press gallery during my keynote speech. And now I must say that that was one of the hardest jobs in my political career. One of the most challenging jobs. I was given that speech. Herbert Hoover had the country in the dumps. And for me to get up there and think of all the good things to say with a straight face and a lot of enthusiasm about why Herbert Hoover ought to be renominated, it was a challenge. I did my best. Now, Earl Hall was sitting in the press gallery looking down a couple rows, and there was Will Rogers, America's most popular funny man. He wrote on his convention program, "Mr. Rogers, please give me the autograph of the world's greatest humorist." He passed it down a couple rows and it made it to Will Rogers. He wrote on it and sent it back to him. Mr. Hall looked at it. L.J. Dickerson.
I can still hear you calling for sane, honest, industrial, and agricultural programs, and a return to the ideas of our New England forefathers. Those were topics near and dear to your heart. At the 1936 Republican National Convention, you were once again a dark horse candidate, but this time for the presidency. The nomination would go to Alf Landon, who was defeated by FDR.
My opposition to the New Deal cost me my election in 1936, although I only lost by a narrow margin during a Democrat landslide. I ran for Senate again in 38, but lost to my opponent in a tight race. Though I served only 1 term in the Senate, I never forgot my roots and always supported agriculture.
We always kept home kind of as our home base and lived here between sessions. So when your time in Washington was up, we came back here. Many former senators used their connection to obtain public office, but you had no interest in that, choosing to come home instead.
During my time as senator, my law partner Tim Harrington suffered an untimely death. I was glad to keep the law firm operating during breaks while his son Robert completed his education and passed the bar so he could take over. Now at that time there were no pensions or other benefits for congressmen or senators, and I had not become wealthy being a public servant on their wage. I think the most I ever made in a year was $12,000, so I did need to keep working. Both of our children now lived in Des Moines area and wanted us to move closer to them. So Carl had opened his own law practice and invited me to join him. The idea of working with my son was very appealing.
It was hard to leave our home on the corner of McGregor and Hall Street that we built as newlyweds. We had so many memories there, and I am very glad that that majestic house, it still stands today. But I have to say, we did enjoy being down in Des Moines and being close to our children and our grandchildren. It was just wonderful. It did not have the pace of Washington, D.C., but it still had that urban feel.
I relish practicing law again and helping clients. Our offices were in the Fleming Building, one of the tallest at the time. I like being downtown in the heart of the city. Those were some of my happiest days. In fact, Carl sometimes teased me about whistling a tune as I walked down the hall or waited for the elevator.
Although everyone continued to call you Senator, your years in Washington did not change the humble, down-to-earth man that I knew.
Well, thank you, dear. It was very difficult when you suffered that stroke and died a year later in 1956. When you were only 77 years old, our children were so helpful throughout your illness and after your death. I missed you terrible. It took some time to get the joy back in life again.
I'm thankful that you had the children nearby, and you stayed active between family and the law practice well into your 90s.
Yes, I was 94 when I broke my hip, which led to my death a few weeks later. I had been privileged to live such a blessed life, and I still find it amazing that a poor Iowa farm boy grew up to represent the citizens of the state in the United States House and Senate. And the Dickinson law firm that Carl and I started in Des Moines is now one of the largest law attorney firms in the state of Iowa.
You see, I was right. You turned out to be very successful. I don't even care what Dad said. Your talent, drive, and ambitious took us places we never dreamt of that we would meet, that we would go when we met. Our life together was just one wonderful adventure. Thank you.
An article from the Upper Des Moines Republican on Wednesday, November 3rd, 1920, on the front page. The headline was, "Many women voted for the first time!" Exclamation point. Election day passed quietly in Iowa, but the voters were out in full force. Both men and women, and the largest vote in the history of the state was polled. Republicans swept the county, state, and nation. Warren Harding was elected president, and both houses of the Congress went to the Republicans. Many women in Algona, 612 to be exact, voted for the first time. They took much interest and spoiled few ballots. It was evident that they studied the issues and prepared themselves beforehand.
Thank you. Can you hear us? I know that Jennifer has a great voice for this kind of thing, but if you can't, you're welcome to move up a little bit. So. Well, Lizzie B. Reed, I am so glad you could join me during your visit from Arkansas.
It's wonderful to be back and see everyone. There's a lot of changes here.
Well, that is true. But when we heard about the Heritage Award, we can see that the town of Algona is still in wonderful hands.
Yes.
Well, we're gathered here today at Williams and my final home. That was kind of our joke all the time, that this was our final home. But if you wish, you can think of us in the house that Altmans lived in at 515 South Harlan. And picture yourself in the parlor, because that is one half of my home. It was moved away from its location and ended up on South Harlan. So if you've been there, you can think of us there. We have to get together today because we're getting a little long in the tooth,
Yes.
unfortunately. And we thought we should do some reminiscing about some of our suffragist activities.
Thanks.
You have been such a leader in the movement, Lizzie.
Well, that is true, Caroline. We both came from New York State, and we were old enough to have heard about the exciting Declaration of Sentiments by Elizabeth Cady Stanton at Seneca Falls Convention in 1848.
I was fortunate to have had a father who supported the well-known Fairfield Seminary, a classic academy and female collegiate institute. I received my education there. It was a forward-thinking school at the time and helped shape my feelings about women's rights and writing and speaking in general.
Well, I'm sorry to say I did not have that advantage. My father decided that our fortunes lay further west. So when I was 14, we moved from near Syracuse to Indiana, and there tragedy struck. 6 weeks after we arrived, my mother passed away. And my father's business ventures did not go as he had hoped. And so the younger children in the family had to go and live in the homes of others. And we older ones, well, we had no choice but to find our own way in the world. So before I turned 16, I was teaching school. I enjoyed teaching. It was very interesting, and as you know, a teacher always learns from their students. And through that, I learned that my real skills and interests lay in writing and publishing as a way to express my thoughts and ideas. So I served an apprenticeship with the newspaper for 2 years, and then for 4 years, I was the foreman of the newspaper in Peru, Indiana. After that, I decided, why not? So I started my own semi-monthly newspaper called The Mayflower, and we had articles about literature and temperance, women's rights, such things as that. I'm very proud to say that that paper became The Lily, published by none other than Susan B. Anthony herself. And it was sent all over the United States and the territories.
You and Dr. Reed came here in 1865.
Yes.
And that was the same year that William and I moved our growing family from our farm north of Algona into town. William was already a good businessman, and the children could go to school in town. It also gave me time for some of my interests, such as the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which for many of us went hand in glove with our thoughts about women's rights.
I was so thrilled and thankful to find a kindred spirit in you, Caroline, when we moved here. Of course, not everyone agreed with us. When Dr. Reed and I attended church in Irvington, I refused to sit with the women and instead stayed by my husband's side. Oh my, did that cause quite the ruckus. I wanted to make the point that I was an equal to any man.
Very good, and I'm sure you did.
I did.
Lizzie, you also became very busy as the first woman publisher of the Algona paper.
Ambrose Kolff started the newspaper, you know, but he was so busy with all of his other ventures that he had to decide to sell the paper. He was very glad to find a veteran newspaper person right here in Algona in me. So I bought it and renamed it the Upper Des Moines to attract interest from a wider area. I published and printed it myself, and oh my, the adventures that Dr. Reed and I had with the horse and the buckboard, traveling through some very marshy country and north and west of Algona, selling subscriptions. We went as far as Spencer seeking subscribers.
I was glad to contribute articles to the paper from time to time, but then you became ill, Lizzie.
Yes, I did. After a year of very hard work, I was exhausted and physically ill and decided it was time to sell the newspaper. But I sold it at a profit.
It didn't take you very long to bounce back either.
No.
You and I founded the Kossuth County Women's Suffrage Association in 1869.
Yes.
Only the second one in the state of Iowa.
And that was also the year you were the first woman to speak at the 4th of July celebration right here in Algona.
Yes. And of course, you can guess my topic, women's rights. William was always proud of my speaking ability, and much was made of the fact that he held the baby while I spoke. In fact, that was the subject of many pictorial cartoons throughout the nation, if you can believe that.
That's true. Well, we were very fortunate to have such supportive husbands, Mr. Reed and Dr. Reed. My husband urged me to continue writing, so in 1872 I published a series of articles in the Northwest Christian Advocate on the status of women in the Methodist Church, and it led to more just recognition in their sermons.
It was in 1873 when you served as the second president of the Iowa Women's Suffrage Association.
Well, they knew that I'd been vice president of the same types of organization in Indiana, so it was nothing new for me.
Yes, unfortunately, that year the roads were really bad between here and Des Moines,
Awful.
and you hardly made any of the meetings.
No, it's terrible.
But you soon found yourself in demand as a speaker on temperance, education, and suffrage.
And then in 1880, it was your turn to serve as president of the Iowa Women's Suffrage Association.
I considered it a great honor and enjoyed my trips around the state as a speaker and encourager of other suffrage associations. One of the things I'm really proud of was that we worked tirelessly, like women in other states, to pass the women's right to vote in all elections.
And we continued to do anything we could to improve the lives of the women, well, really all people in our community. One of the things I'm very proud of was our collection of books about temperance and other related topics that formed the basis of the Algona Public Library's collection.
Remember that spring banquet?
Oh my, yes.
Isn't that something? That we organized in 1889 to raise funds for a reading room, the beginning of a real library in Algona. It was just one room with 100 books, and every 3 months there would be a new volunteer librarian. But it was a start. Later, in 1904, William and I donated half the block on which our house stood for a new Carnegie library, with the proviso that it would house the tarpon that William had caught in Florida. Those of you who are sports people, and I know there are some here, will understand that we had no more room on our wall.
I was gone for that part of the battle with the tarpon and to get the library. Dr. Reed and I moved to Arkansas for a time.
How I missed you, Lizzie.
Oh, I missed you too.
Our dear friend and compatriot for so many causes. When Algona hosted the County Women's Suffrage Convention at the Congregational Church, my church, in May of 1897, we had high hopes of passing a bill supporting women's suffrage in the Iowa legislature. What powerful examples we had.
Oh, yes.
Remember Laura
Wonderful.
Gregg from Kansas, an organizer for the National American Women's Suffrage Association, was the manager and inspiring spirit for the convention. We also had Reverend Anna Shaw from New England.
Oh.
Yes. She was a very witty, eloquent, and forceful speaker, urging us that we were so close to the goal of votes for women in Iowa. And then your letter. It was most welcome and cheering.
Well, I wanted to do anything I could to help. Iowa almost became one of the few states giving women the right to vote. In 1897, the House gave the women's suffrage bill 49 yes votes, and in 1898, 50 yes votes, just one short of a constitutional majority. We had hoped to bring the vote to the people of Iowa in the historic year of 1900, but that was not to be.
No. Iowa was considered the best organized of all the Midwestern states, and we hoped that we would be able to join Colorado, Wyoming, Idaho, and Utah in giving women the right to vote in all elections. Unfortunately, the antis began to show their strength and formed the Iowa Society Opposed due to the extension of suffrage to women.
Why?
Even Mrs. H.A. Foster of this city, by the way, are any of you related to her?
That's good.
That is good, yes. Spent time organizing opposition all over the state. We had all hoped that once they were educated about the need for women's suffrage and what it could accomplish, that these women would change their minds. but it didn't work that way.
No. Caroline, I had so hoped that you and I could go to the polls together to vote that first time. But sadly, I don't think we'll live long enough to have that privilege.
No, the things that sustain me are that my daughters will surely have that opportunity, and that my son Harvey has been a supporter of women's suffrage since he was 10 years old.
You raised him well.
Thank you. He would stand on the platform while I gave my speeches. I do have a lot of faith in Carrie Chapman Catt's ability to organize and carry us over the goal in time. And you folks out there already know the rest of the story. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Last stop, so I'll give you my last introduction before we get to hear our wonderful performers.
Ladies can project, right?
Okay, I think we might need to get closer.
Jennifer, do you want the mic? We've got it. Yeah, we're closer.
Is it working?
Okay, turn it on and off again.
It is.
Hello?
There you go.
There you go. Look at that.
Because the microphone really carries, so if you're up a little bit closer, they won't have to talk quite so loud.
Okay. So our last introduction is from an editorial entitled Women as Jurors on page 1 of the Upper Des Moines Republican from Wednesday, November 10th, 1920. The jury list for district court is made from poll books, and as the books contain the names of many women who voted in the recent election, it is evident that some of them will be drawn upon the jury. There is no reason to think that ladies are not qualified in this capacity, and in many instances, no doubt they are better fitted than men. Of course, being drawn upon the jury does not mean that the victims will have to serve. All is owing to the kind of excuse the person drawn can be present to the judge. All the ladies with their winning smiles and pretty faces will probably have more influence on the average judge than an ordinary farmer. Now, if a whole panel of jurors would be composed of women, it would be one of the wonders of the age if 11 women could agree upon anything. And with that, let's give it over to these wonderful women.
Thank you. Thank you, Marie, for inviting us here today to celebrate our first vote in a presidential election.
Well, I'm so happy to have you here on this auspicious occasion. I love to entertain you.
I explained to Mrs. Murtaugh that I hope to do a brief interview with each of you because I'm hoping to write a book someday about our experience voting.
That is so ambitious of you, Evelyn. I knew you were talented, but I did not know you were a writer.
Well, Mrs. Geigel, I may work at the courthouse now, but I love to write. And even though arthritis does make it painful for me, I jot down a lot of notes and collect newspaper clippings that I hope to use one day. Maybe we should start with you, Mrs. Geigel, since you were the first woman to vote in your ward.
Well, thank you. You know, I wasn't surprised that I was the first woman to vote in Ward 2 because my husband Frank and I are early risers. I must say that the poll workers expected that there would be a lot of women at the polls yesterday, but it is still such a new experience for them. Imagine 612 new women voters, according to the Upper Des Moines yesterday, or today, at one general election.
Tell us why you decided to vote, Sarah.
I'd be happy to. When
I was in my 20s, I was the power to the people. Okay. When I was When I was in my 20s, I was the postmistress at Lone Rock, and later I attended the State Normal School in Cedar Falls and taught in Lone Rock, Burt, and Algona. So you could say that I was very well educated, and I knew a bit of the world at that point. And you know, I could tell things really needed to be improved. I was especially active in the Women's Christian Temperance Union, along with Carolyn Ingham and Lizzie B. Reed, that you've had the chance to meet this evening, and many others. we could see the horrors of drink and hoped that by getting the vote, we could make lives much better for all women. I didn't marry until 3 years ago, so I was as independent as any woman could be, you might say.
I would say so. Sarah lived to be 89 years old and was active in the Presbyterian Church until 2 falls necessitated her moving into the Good Samaritan Rest Home for the final 2 years of her life. Mrs. Leffert, or Ida as I knew you at the courthouse and admired you so, tell us a little bit about you and why you voted yesterday.
Oh, your words are so kind, Evelyn. We only worked at the courthouse together for 1 year in the recorder's office with Mr. and Mrs. Frank Henderson, and I, the deputy auditor, for my brother Andrew at first, and then Mr. Norton for 2 terms, and finally for Mr. Beardsley for a few months.
You were known for your knowledge of drainage records, one of the most important things to know in Kossuth County, and everything else about the auditor's office.
Yes, Mr. Beardsley begged me to stay almost until my wedding day so that I could teach him the ropes. Of course, my husband, as a state university graduate in engineering, whose specialty was drainage engineering, so you can imagine the conversations we had at the dinner table. He became the county engineer in 1913.
You were also president of the Iowa Lady Stenographers Club, the first organization of its kind in Iowa.
That's true, but I gave all that up to marry Dave Leffert on June 23, 1915. Our daughter, Isla Mae, was born on December 22nd of the next year. When I voted, all I could think about was Isla Mae. We had a neighbor stay with her when we went to the polls because I thought 4 was a little too young to understand what we were doing. But I vowed to take her with me when I voted again in 1924.
Ida was known as a very capable and most lovable woman with very many friends. She was an active member of the Methodist Church. She was also the past matron of the Eastern Star. And Isla Mae and her husband Harold Parsley were living in Tokyo, Japan, at the time of Ida's death in 1967. We've heard from some women who worked away from home until their marriages and lived independent lives, but you have a different story, Mrs. Sullivan.
Yes, in a way, but not really so different. By the way, I signed my name Essie Sullivan at the polls instead of Mrs. J.W. Sullivan. Did the rest of you?
Well, yes, but I used my actual first name, Anna M. Murtaugh.
I signed my name, Mary L. Krantz.
Whoa, no.
My story. Well, my parents came to Algona in a covered wagon with us 5 children in 1867, 2 years after I was born. My father set up a shoe shop and it did very well. So well that he bought a half a block on Call Street and had our lovely house built in 1885. While I did not work away from home, I was very busy at home. My older sister Alice had married and then died of tuberculosis in 1886. Such a scourge in those years. And she left behind 2 little boys, Josh 4 and 18-month-old Claire Blossom. My brothers had moved away, so I became the surrogate mother to those sweet boys and took care of my parents as well. I was 21. Sadly, in 1894, at age 10, Claire also succumbed to tuberculosis, which haunted me from then on. The years passed, but don't feel sorry for me. I had a rich social life with many friends and beaux, and then along came a handsome and brilliant lawyer, John W. Sullivan. He courted me for 3 years, and when we married on April 24th, 1895, it was called the event of the season. We waited 10 years for a child to come on the scene, and when I was 40, Wade was born, the apple of our eyes, of course. J.W. was elected to the Iowa legislature, so I learned about many political issues close at hand. Of course, he was interested in women's suffrage and gave programs about it locally. One in 1897 at the Equal Suffrage Club was called Women in Law. how could I not go to the polls in the first presidential election where I was entitled to vote?
Right. That was a stirring story. Very stirring. Mrs. Krantz, you've only lived in Algona a very short time, so we know less about you. Could you tell us why you chose to vote in this election?
Sure. Well, like so many farm wives, I worked hard to keep our 162 and a half acres going in Wesley Township when we moved there in 1891. I drove the wagon with milk and cream to the Wesley Sexton Creamery, which was sometimes a harrowing experience depending on the weather and the horses. I raised chickens, and I did the many other chores that go along with being a farm wife and a mother. Lewis and I continued to buy farmland, and he was on the board of directors that in 1905 established the Farmers Savings Bank in Sexton, where he was the vice president. He also took loads of cattle to the Chicago cattle market, so we had a little broader view of the world than just in Wesley Township. And we were very interested in politics and loved to discuss the different events nationally and locally. So in 1914, Lewis decided to run for the 3rd District Supervisor, and even though he lost in the general election, primary election, we gained much from the experience. I just wish that other women and I could have voted in that election. And being a member of the Methodist Church, I think also gave me a larger community outreach. And I joined 3 different churches in the area until Lewis and I became very active in the Doane Good Hope Methodist Episcopal Church that was right around the corner from our farm. We served on many committees, and I was also a leader in the Women's Club. And as you know, when I moved to Algona in 1918, I joined the Methodist Church here. I believe that it's the responsibility of every citizen, man or woman, to vote to improve our nation.
Marie, our hostess, I think we all know why you voted.
Well, of course, I was happy to participate in the landslide victory of Warren G. Harding because I thought we did need a return to normalcy after World War I. I had invited Woodrow Wilson to our home north of Thornton after Ed and I built it in 1915, but he politely declined. Maybe that was what on my mind when I voted. I was a forward thinker. I also invited George Washington Carver, the most prominent Negro scientist of the early 20th century, to another reception, but he also sent regrets. Carrie Chapman Catt earned my admiration as a strategist in the women's suffrage movement. Without her plan to both lobby Congress and to work in the states to pass the 19th Amendment, it would not have happened yet. Now I understand she wants to start an organization called League of Women's Voters to continue women's education on issues of importance in our country. We do have a lot of clubs in Algona, and I've heard that the Federated Women's Clubs may do some of the same things as this league. So we may not have that organization here.
Marie was correct about that, but her daughter-in-law, Vida Murtaugh, was one of the principal organizers of the League of Women Voters when it was founded in Algona on September 29, 1950. She was, and most of us were, incorrect about Warren G. Harding. He was considered one of the worst U.S. presidents in history.
Well, how about you, Evelyn? You voted, didn't you?
I certainly did. Working at the courthouse interested me in politics and how to get things done. My health was also another factor. I knew that as a wheelchair-bound woman since 1914, I was going to have to make my way alone in the world, and I needed to have a voice in the decisions that affected women's lives.
Hear, hear.
I never did get around to writing that book about these ladies, but I did write social columns for the local newspaper for over 20 years, beginning in 1940. Now you know a little about some of us who crowded those polls in 1920 in Algona and all over the United States to cast our first votes in a presidential election. And we hope that you each take your right to vote a little more seriously after hearing our stories.
There's a stone over there commemorating it, but actually his cabin was more over here. So I always thought it had to be where the stone is, right? But it's kind of was like right on this corner. And it was just a one-room cabin. When they describe it, it's only like maybe like 12 by 16 feet. So some of you have, that is a different cabin. That's not Asa's cabin, but very similar in construction and size. So everything was in that room. And he brought his bride here, Sarah, and when they had company come over, they did have a table. It was kind of a work table where she cooked or whatever, and they would have to set the table outside so that people could make a bed in the house at night. So if you think back to like 1854 or whatever, they were living in this tiny little cabin. Well, it became the rich part. This is before it was the rich. This poor little cabin was probably surrounded by trees. So, but that's where Asa, when Ambrose came and Asa came, they loved all the trees. They loved how it's nice and high, that it wouldn't be flooded. So Ambrose actually, his cabin, and I'm sure there are historical people here that know better than I do, but his first cabin was down by the river. But Asa built up here, his cabin up here. And then he built a second house. It was a 2-story wood house. And that house he built to the east, so I'm assuming just over there somewhere. And once the house was built, they tore down the cabin. And then later in his life, they built what's called the Call Mansion. And that was built to the east of the two-story house. So I'm guessing it probably took in Dee's house and you know, it probably was over on that direction. And actually Asa, everything from this corner that we're standing on all the way down to Oak Drive, all of Thorrington, that was just one parcel of land that he owned. And then it went over past Dodge Street and took in part of the other street. So it was, if you just think about it, it was a large wooded area, and then he sold out parcels for houses because him and his brother in their area, they realized that people were going to move west, and so really the next settlement when they moved here, there were a few trappers or traders that lived in Irvington, and then Fort Dodge is kind of where people would get off the train to come up here, but you had to come up here by buckboard or by horseback to get to Algona. And I'm just going to wait a little bit to catch these guys. And I have left my book at my house, which I just live right over there. So we'll stop by there and I'll grab my information from there. But I've lived here a long time, so I can tell you most of the stuff that's here. So this is a commemorative stone over here. You guys can just walk over here if you like. So Sarah's maiden name was Heckert, and she was quite young when she came up here. They had 7 children, and she died in childbirth with her youngest child. And so, but when she came up here, she was just, I want to say she was only like 18 years old. He was older than that, but she was really, really young. And so anytime anyone came through, they just stayed at your cabin or whatever, because there really wasn't anything else here. And Asa talks about that he could get up in the morning, go out on the front porch, and shoot a goose for supper that night. That there was so much wildlife here that he didn't even have to get off his front porch. So kind of interesting to think about anyway. But we'll take it over here. Thank you guys for joining in here. So families stayed close together, and as I talk about these houses, you'll see that there's a lot of family connections. You know, we'll talk about a lot of families related to each other. So guess whose house this one is? Nope, it's not my house. Good guess, but no. This is Ambrose Call, his brother. He built this shortly after Asa built the cabin, as soon as they got the sawmill going. And it was the first grand house in Algona. And it has mahogany stairways, and it has 5 bedrooms in it originally. And Asa owned it until Chrysilises bought it. And then actually 3 generations of Chrysilises lived in this house. And I don't know if people remember Chrysilises store down on Main Street.
RTK, sell.
Oops, I'm on the tour.
You're on the tour. Okay, we're looking for you.
Okay, bye-bye. That's my code for I can't talk to you right now. So the Chrysilises maintained this house, and Ted Chrysilises was the 3rd generation, and they actually had a housekeeper. A lot of these houses had people that came in and cleaned and gardened for them because they were quite big family homes. And he had a favorite housekeeper, and when we walk by it, you'll see that on the west side, he added a small house for his housekeeper. Her husband died, and she didn't have a home to live in, but they really liked how she kept house, and so they built this small little cabin that was attached to their house. So we'll see that as we go by. What else was I going to tell you about Chrysilises? And you can kind of see is that Gothic Carpenter style house. It's got all the kind of Victoria trim up by the roofs. And today, during the Depression, or not during the Depression, this house later on became a boarding house, and it still is a boarding house today. Yes.
I'm noticing the deterioration. Do they not have a historical society that will help fund the restorations?
I know that it's privately owned, and I have no idea how that works exactly, but it'd be nice. It's a shame, yes. It's a beautiful house. So, as soon as I pick up my slip, I want to. Actually, I think it's older than it looks. I think it was built like 1870, but I will give you the exact date. I ran down to the reception and realized I left all my paperwork behind, but I've lived here quite a while that I know most of them. So we'll move on to the next house. So kind of take a look towards the back. It also has stained glass windows that kind of date the era of it up in the second story. It did at one time have a wraparound porch, but that's gone. I don't remember it, but maybe some of you remember it. And so there's a little cabin. There's a lot of love stories on this street, and I think how sweet that they want to make sure their housekeeper had a house. I'll have to build one for Harley. He does clean house really well. So this house is called the Chrysillus Cabin. And I want you to kind of note, this was very stylish in its day to have this hipped roof. And some people think that's Dutch colonial, but I think it's an architectural design. And this house was probably the first house to have an actual architect design it for him. But this was a cabin to go with the Chrysillus' house. And so when their son grew up or whatever, then and married, they built this house for him and his bride. And where the windows are on the north side, that was an open porch. And then to the back, they had a summer kitchen. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with them, but they carried out the wood stove, which I can't imagine how heavy that could be. But in the spring, they would carry it out and they'd set it on this back porch and have this summer kitchen so they wouldn't heat up the house. So, and then the shakes on the house was quite stylish in 1880. It was, so this would have been like, wow, a really modern house at the time. But it's a beautiful house, and it's the test of time. You know, it's still a beautiful house today. It does have bevel glass in the living room, and that's original to the house. Yes, and let me grab you. Yes, he did run the store. And then there's so many Chrysillus'. I want to say 4 generations went through that house, or maybe I think 4, because then the son lived here. Then when the parents got old, they switched houses, and then the young son went over there. Then the grandson came in here, and yeah, they kept doing that until I think 1990. So they kept family close. This next house, I do not have any information. We're going to have some houses that I just didn't have any research on. And so I know it's an older home, but I really don't have any information on it. It does have that beautiful bevel glass, and I'm guessing that's probably original to the house. All right, for 1 second, just park in front of the house. This is my house. Okay, and because I want you to have the full tour and you guys can look back, Let's see. Does it tell me how old that house is? It says 4 generation, and actually the cottage was built in 1895, but the actual greenhouse was built about 20 years before that. So, right around 1880. And let's see, is there anything that I missed about those houses? And what's hard on here is because there were a lot of Teds in that family. So it's hard to, but there was Crucilis in that cottage until 1990. So that's a lot of Crucilises. And it says that the Crucilis store in the last years were owned by Ted and Jack Crucilis. So I thought maybe some of you guys might know that already. And let me see. In the greenhouse, the first house that they had, in 1945, it was made into apartments. So, hey, I remembered a lot of it. Okay, so this house is my house. I'm Ann Kohlhaus and my husband Harley, and we moved into this house. It's an Italianate, is what they call the style. And a lot of people that travel to Europe, they kind of remembered the houses over there, and they come back and they put some of that styling on, and you can tell it's Italianate by the wide soffits up there and the band on the top, and then Harley calls them the eyebrows over the windows, but I'm not sure that probably is not a proper term. We loved this house when we moved into it. Italianate was popular from 1840 to 1890. The owner of it was a Mr. Benham, who built it for his wife after returning from the Civil War. So it was built sometime between 1868 and 1871. He had survived a gunshot wound, but 8 years later died from blood poisoning from the remaining lead in his body. His wife sold the house to Evie Sweeting, an attorney. The street on the north is a one-block street named Sweeting, and you can see the sign right there. There used to be an East Sweeting, but then it turned into an alley later on. So Sweeting Street used to be 2 blocks instead of 1 block, is what I'm saying. And the house was later made into the Vera Apartments, and then Ann Clark moved into this house. And she lived in the basement, and she made she was a seamstress and made a lot of beautiful clothes, but a lot of people remember having their wedding dresses made there. And is there anybody here that got their wedding dress from Ann Clark? Oh, man. What's that?
I delivered newspapers.
Oh, okay. And I tell you what, you had clothes from her. Oh, really? Okay. Well, she's a lively character, everything you read about her, and so I'm kind of inspired that I'm the second Anne in this house. So I really enjoy it. Mine? Mine are down there, but no, I didn't check for other people's. Oh, they make wine? Okay. Well, anyway, she's quite a colorful person. This porch was added probably in the 60s. But the original house, the porch had a flat top, keeping with that Italianate. It was very square. And then it had cement steps running down. And the cement steps are under the porch. And I so would like to tear that porch apart and put it back the way it was. But that's probably not going to happen.
How long have you lived here?
Just a little over 8 years. And so, and it was apartments before that. But we turned it back into a single family home. And the house was built in 2 parts, and the line was right there. And we're not sure when they added this second one. I think it's when Evie Sweeting moved here, he added that on. But there really isn't any evidence to say why it was built in 2 parts. The bricks are 18 inches deep, so the really thick walls. Let me tell you, anytime we want to go through a wall, we think about it really hard. And she had beautiful Italian gardens. I read in a write-up about her. So I have tried to keep the gardens, you know, up and kind of in that idea of those Italian gardens. The koi pond is Harley's addition. There are pets, and you can feed them and all that good stuff. We just added it here. So we'll go across the street here. Most of these large homes back in the 1900s, they had huge gardens. We're going to stop at this red house. This is currently owned by the Foots. They just moved here a few years ago. This is a site. I want to stop here early in this because this is the original site of David and Susie Haggard. And David was just a teenager when his dad was a surveyor, and he surveyed Kossuth County. So, and then and they did that in 1854. Then after fighting in the Civil War, David came back to Algona in 1881. He even served as mayor of Algona in 1886. The Haggard Too Good Trust that funds many fine art projects and art education in Kossuth County was established by two of David and Susie's granddaughters, Barbara Haggard and Eleanor Haggard Too Good. So that trust was founded by their daughters. But the original house is gone. But we do have a really pretty house up here. It's called a 4-square classic styled home. This one was built in 1910, and you can kind of see by the style of it. They've done a lot of remodeling over the years, so it didn't probably look like this in 1910. Actually, it said that, and this is a site of Al Falkenheimer. He's the founder of Pharmacists Mutual. He purchased the lot by trading farm ground for it. His wife, Maddie, was the only daughter of David and Susie Haggard. So Maddie lived here, and her parents lived right over there. So families just always kind of lived close together. She helped organize the League of Women Voters in Algona. Maddie employed help who cooked and cleaned and gardened, as many of the other homes did at the time. And I think this house, and behind it, it had stables. So in 1910, you know, cars were just coming in the United States. And so most of these homeowners, they had their, you know, they kept a horse and carriage. And a lot of these, because they're more stately homes, they had a stable right here where they'd take that horse and carriage. Yeah. This home is called a Carpenter Gothic Cottage and is one of the oldest residences in Algona. The west portion of the house, so the back portion of the house, as well as the kitchen, date back to the Civil War. And the front was added in 1900. So, you know, it's probably 1864, the first cabin part was built, then the rest of the house was built. So, the wind is catching me here. This house was owned by Charlie Murtaugh. He was a politician and the president of the Security State Bank, which back then is where Ann Nearson now has her office. The house was purchased in 1912, and he was the brother of Ed Murtaugh, so we'll go by his brother's house. And like I said, a lot of these people were all kind of connected together, and a lot of family living on the street. So I've always loved this house. I like all that extra trim on it, and it's just got a really pretty look to it. Yeah, actually, Charlie Murtaugh and his brother Ed never owned a car, even though they were like the wealthiest men in town, and the cars were out at that time. They thought, well, they thought they were dangerous, and that they weren't something that was going to catch on, and who would not want a horse and carriage instead of a car? So I don't know how many of you guys kept your horse and carriage, but that, they were like at a point, it's kind of like my husband and I, we owned a Commodore computer, and we thought it was great when you could put in a great big disc and play ping pong or whatever on it. and so they were kind of at that point too. Cars were coming in, and whether you liked it or not, and they liked the horse and carriage. So they walked to work. I mean, a lot of them just walked uptown. Okay. Let's see. I'm sorry, but I don't have a lot of information on this particular one. This house at 521 was built by Max Herbst. He was a partner in the Crushilla store. This style of house is also Italianate style, and by the wide soffits and the wide board under the soffits and the squareness of the house, that's kind of how you it seems so different than my house, but they both are kind of that style. And it was built in 1900. And this house behind, they probably had, they probably also had a place for, a carriage house or whatever. But there were tennis courts behind the house. And so those are gone today, but they were built in. A lot of these places had that type. They had big gardens and tennis courts, and were on big lots. This house, there's a lot of original to it, and you can kind of see in the windows. It's a craftsman style, built in 1913, so just a couple years after that. So these houses, they've been here together, since 1913. And it was Jesse and Rhonda Bonaire, and Jesse Bonaire was a lawyer and maintained an office in his home. They said you could walk in the front door and his office was right there. I don't know if that's right or not, but that's what they say. He served as the Algona City attorney for many years. He also became a judge, I think, in his later years. The house originally featured a porch on the north side, and recently has had the pergola added to it. So it always had this front porch, but I think it did wrap around to the north. Let's see if I'm in the right. I don't have the actual date of when it was built. I'm guessing that it's probably in the 30s, maybe 35. The deep porches and detail to Victorian era were no longer popular. And then new materials like the glass block wall on the south side were now being used. So you kind of see the changeover from the 1900 houses to the ones a little bit later. And then we're going to go on the end here. And this house, there's a lot written about it. So I said someday I'm going to turn it into a book because there's so much written about this house. So I have a question for you. Did anybody sled on the hill to the back of this house? It was called like, oh, it's on that side. Oh. Okay. Well, they're wrong. Then my little write-up's wrong. Okay. Peter Purvis came from Scotland and built this Carpenter Gothic house in 1885. He came from generations of farmers, but he apprenticed with a carpenter for 4 years and learned the trade. He built many of the houses and craft pieces in Algona. He even built the pulpit for the Congregational Church. The house once stood on 3 acres of land with extensive gardens and an orchard. The house was later owned by Purvis' children and spouses. Among them was Edward is it Hogue or Hugh? Hugh? And it was, yeah, and the former sledding hill. And here it says to the southwest of the house, but I think it was on the north side. On the north side. Okay, you were one of the sledders, so. But there's a lot about his family and all the woodcrafts that he did, and they were quite impressive people that came here. And he also was a joiner, and I guess carpenters can tell me what that is, but he was very skilled at that, so he was hired by a lot of people because of his carpentry skill. And so if I ever write a book about Thornton Street, he's going to be one of my main characters. Okay, now we're going to head down the hill clear to the end on the other side, so watch the traffic.
3 acres, that had to be quite a bit of land.
Well, he owned clear down to the street, and then he must have owned up to that Craftsman, I'm guessing. So this house, if you look at it, and I told you to look at that cottage front, well, the builder of this house was William Eilers, and he was a pharmacist. And when he moved here, he saw so remember the little gray cottage house, and he liked that architect had designed it, and he wanted that same look for his house. And so that's how that comes in. And so he bought Dingley's Pharmacy in partnership with Otto Falkenhainer. It's a Falkenhainer, I'm probably saying it wrong, Falkenhainer. And Eilers was from New York and was experienced in hardware. And Falkenhainer worked for Dingley and was liked by everybody. He was actually a chemist, and I guess he was super smart, people tell me. And Algona Upper Des Moines Register on May 16th of 1900 stated, "The Ehlers house is a cottage home after the style of Theo Chryslis' cottage. The home is 38 by 46 feet, featuring a very large and handsome porch. Construction cost was $3,000. In 1908, Eilers sold the house to Joe Misbach for $3,650, which was a bargain price for this lovely home. And Ehlers moved to Milwaukee, and Joe owned Kraft and Mishbach's, which was a clothing store. He married Edna McGuire and had 2 sons, Leighton and Lawrence, and a daughter, Catherine. And Leighton went on to be a mayor in Algona. The land was owned by Otto Falkenheimer, and that was the chemist that works in the drugstore downtown. And so they worked together. So these were like business partners here. And him and his wife Anna built the house. He actually sold the ground to Eilers to build this house on the end. But their houses went up just at the same time. The rock wall that you see over there, the stone wall, the stones were in the street, and when they tore up the stones from there, they used them in this wall. And his daughter Helen Falkenheimer Fletch and her husband Frank lived here for many years. At the end of the Depression, the upstairs was converted to an apartment with its own utilities, and the stairs were moved to the front foyer. Later, the stairs were moved back to their original location, and second set of utilities were removed. And a lot of people with these large homes, they did a lot of things to save their home during the Depression. And as we walk, we'll talk about that. So we're going to go up to the steps on the next house. Unfortunately, this next house I do not have any information on. I'm not even sure when it was built.
I thought it was older than these two.
Oh, really?
It could be. We've
Okay.
been trying to determine that.
Yeah, I'm just not sure when that house went up.
Well, Otto Falkenheimer was the head of Pharmacists Mutual, Druggist Mutual at the time.
Right, and his brother Al just lived on the other side of the street. So, yep, they hung together. All right, would you like to talk about your own house?
Read what you got. I'd like to
All right, okay. You want to hear about your house? All right. This is the uphill part. This is where you get your calorie burn now after having that lemonade. All right, we're going to stop by the steps here somewhere. I'll let them catch up here. Hi, this house was built in 1915 by Ed and Maria Murtaugh. The house had a ballroom on the 3rd floor. Ed Murtaugh was the owner of County Savings Bank, which was located on State Street. The marble that was used in the house was the same as he used in the bank. The grounds included a tennis court, extensive gardens to the east that Maria tended. They also had servants that also took care of the house and the gardens. When Ed lost his bank in the Depression and later died in 1936, Marie was able to keep the house until 1945 by taking in boarders. The boarders were usually teachers and other young professionals. And I know that Minnie, oh no, I can't remember her name, one of the early principals here, she lived in that house for a while. But this is Bill and Farnham and Colleen, and they live here now. So I'll let them tell a little bit about their own house.
One of the boarders was Doc Borns, your father. When he got his medical degree, he came back and lived up in that corner. And they changed the sunroom, above the sunroom, they changed that into apartments during the war. Ed Murtaugh was protege of Gardner's Coles. And Gardner Coles went to Des Moines, established the Des Moines Register and Tribune, and then later the Minneapolis Star, became immensely wealthy. Ed stayed here. He had 4 or 5 banks in this county. And in 1916, he built this house. There's a diary that he left and explained coming from his bank, which is where my office is right now, the County Savings Bank, that's attached to the Glass Bank, Security State. That was his office. He'd walk here during the day and watch them build this house. And he talked elaborately about the fall and how the landscaper did this so that the water would move away from the house, of course. Now, there was a house on this site, so he bought the house, and in the winter he lifted it up, and on sleds and horses he moved it 1 block over behind when you get down to the...
Right, I'll point it out, but there was a house on this site before this site.
He wanted to build according to plan and moved it over to that site. There was a tennis court where Fred Kent's house is now. I call it the Fred Kent house, Senior, Junior, and Bruce, and now their daughter. And the next house was the Gardner's house. And when he died, Marie moved out of this house into the Gardner's house and lived there till 1966. I didn't get to know her. Did anybody know Marie? Did you know her?
See, I lived on Oak Street right across from that Gardner's house, and my folks knew Marie, and so we went over there.
She's quite a person, from what I hear.
She was an elderly lady when that's what I remember.
Sure.
And then N.C. Rice bought the house. He was the one that had the call theater that burned down. Very famous.
Yes.
He bought our house.
I remember being.
And then Joe Bradley built the house, lived in there. Bradley Implement lived in there many years. And then Henderson's and then us. So we've been here 22 and a half years and we're remodeling like crazy. To keep it up, and it's not easy, you know. But we absolutely love this house. It's just it's a wonder.
And the houses that survived, it takes people that want to keep, you know, those older houses. They weren't exactly built for our time, so it really takes a lot of love to keep some of these houses. Yes, they weren't built for.
It's called a cement house because the floors are cement. So the wood on it is just as flat as can be. Oak trim, oak woodworking all through the whole house. Quarter sawed oak, if you know anything about quarter sawing oak. Beautiful what they do with quarter saw. You don't do that anymore. Wainscoting, the whole works. It was well done. It was a well built house. We've got early pictures, and that basswood tree was there.
Oh, wow.
The blue spruces were there. None of those on that side, but most of these were here when the house was built. So they're at least 150 years old, 125, 50 years old. Wow. And there's a ballroom on the 3rd floor. It's an overgrown attic, big attic, but there were a lot of parties up there during the day. And there was always a maid in the house, and there was always a gardener down where Marie lived, past Fred Kent's house. Yep. The maid was Elsie Green from Whittemore.
Bradley girls had sock hops upstairs.
Oh. Doesn't it make you just want to go up there and dance in there on the 3rd floor?
I feel very honored to work in his bank. I own that building and live in this house.
Wow, that's really cool. Thank you so much, Bill. I appreciate it. This cottage-style house was built in hang on, I'll find it, 1946. And Bob Diekman, if you happen to know him, he lived in this house. His father built it. And probably one of the cute stories that he told me, since we just came from the Murtaugh house over there. So Bob would have been, you know, about 20 when Murtaughs were over there. And he said that Ed Murtaugh walked up to the bank every day and he put on a black derby hat. And then he'd carry a black cane that had a gold handle and a gold tip on the bottom of the cane. And then when women came by in a horse and carriage or in a car or whatever, he would twirl that as he walked down Thorrington. And Bob said, back in those days, canes weren't for a bad hip. They were a fashion statement. And so I thought it was adorable that he kind of, you know, you kind of get a feel for that era. And so, unfortunately, I do not have the information about what was here before this house, but it was built in 1946. And I asked him, I said, was a garage on there, you know? And he said, well, of course, my dad, you know, was a good carpenter, and of course, he put the garage on. So, okay. And then they added on. Okay. Okay. Is there anything else about the house that you know, or do you know what was? Was there a house here before this house, or is this probably this could have been part of like their?
The 1940s.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it
okay.
Been a big.
Yeah.
It was a vacant lot.
Oh, okay, okay. And then he said that behind this house, there was a foundation of an older house, but when he was 16, him and his best friend, they broke up that foundation long before you moved in here. So that might explain the yard. I don't know, but. So this house here was built by William Haggard. And you remember Dave and Susie? They had 3 children that lived on the street and 1 grandchild that lived here. So this one's a little bit more modern because it was built in 1937. And it's an English Tudor style house. And the house was featured in Architects magazine and book. And attention was called to the 1.5-story living room. So we're going to walk up there and look at this living room a little bit. Yes, and Doc Kingfield's on this. And so people that are interested in architecture, one reason it was written up was for the 45-degree angle of the living room. The roof section of this house is carried so low that the windows are treated as wall dormers. So it really carries the roof in there. It's like built into the windows. Haggard was the publisher of the Algona Republican newspaper. There were actually 3 different papers in Algona. So it's been very confusing for me because they keep changing names. But he was the Algona Republican newspaper. He was a bachelor for most of his life. And then he married his housekeeper, Sigrid, very late in life. And they are buried together in Riverview Cemetery. Oh man, that housekeeper, I can, yes, just scandalous. I mean, I don't know, did she bake him cookies? How did this happen? But anyway, he married the housekeeper. The Greek revival, you can kind of see at the top of the columns, I can't think what those are called, the little curlicues at the top. What are they called? Oh, man. There we go. Back when I was in college, I could have told you that, but now I've totally lost that. Thank you. I kept telling Harley, people will know what these are when I'm walking this street. The house still has the original woodwork and hardwood floors. The 2-car garage was added in 1980. Melzar and Bessie Haggard lived here, so this was another, were the original owners of this house. It was built in 1920 and lived here until 1965. Their daughter Barbara lived there until 1978. Benny and Mary Waller bought the property. He was the editor of the Upper Des Moines newspaper, and in 1989, the current owners purchased it. But Barbara Haggard was one of the sisters. That's what makes the Haggard Two Good Trust. So she was a granddaughter to Dave and Susie Haggard. So you kind of see how on the street, the families, the Murtaughs, you know, the 2 brothers were on here. There was a lot of family, and the Pharmacist Mutual, what is their names? Otto and Al Falkenheimer, yeah. Am I saying, is it Heimer or Hammer or Heiner? Heiner? Okay. You can tell I didn't take any German in school. Yeah, so they both lived on this street. It's kind of interesting to see how they kind of intermarried and people lived on the street together.
Do you remember when she was it one of these houses over here that got
Oh, yes. Yes, and I told you. Yeah, so that red house there was actually on the property before Murtaugh built his house.
Okay.
And that house, I think it dates like 1890. So, and I have like no information other than they took it in the wintertime on sleds and slid it across the ground to where it's at now. So, what's that? With horses and sleds. And, you know, the city of Rolfe moved because they built Rolfe, and then the railroad came through differently than what they thought it was going to. And so they picked up all their downtown businesses, put them on sleds, moved them 5-6 miles over so they could be by the railroad. So it is crazy. I mean, I think about that like, oh yeah, we'll just move that house over. So, and Tom and Pat McGuire currently live here. They're building this house over here. Their daughter, and they'll retire. They wanted 1-level living. They live here now, and they'll be moving over here. Yep.
Is your daughter going to live in one dwelling by herself, or is she
Yes.
still needing
Yes.
a lot of care?
She still needs a lot of care, and so they'll live next door. And they built it this way because they know that she might outlive them.
Yeah.
And so this way a caretaker could live in the other one.
Yep.
So it kind of makes sense. And we've gotten the joy of watching construction all the time. And you know how this is just a street of families and everybody's related to everybody? Well, the next house we're coming up to is my son's house. So we are totally guilty of this whole thing. Yes, we are completing that whole circle.
Is that his garden?
That's his garden, yep. Okay.
I think he shares with you, right? What does he do besides gardening?
Well, if anybody knows Harley, he does the Algona Community Gardens, so we have a lot of produce. If anybody wants zucchini, just come to me. I have a big resource for it. I'm going to talk about this just a little bit, and they have some homemade wine, I think, for you. All right, so we're just going to stop here for a second. This was built in 1888. It's a Carpenter Gothic house, and it was built by J.F. Nicholin, a popular local photographer at the turn of the century. Joe quickly built a photography business. He had a camera that would produce 18 by 22 inch life-size photos, and he had studied the art of retouching. This made his business widely popular for wedding parties, infants, and families. If you have a photo from that era, look for the Nicholin logo. Joe was also quite handsome and married the beautiful Isabella, and she was known for her long, dark hair that came down to her waist in curls, which was quite the fashion of the day. They were wonderful dancers and would go to Irvington by horse and carriage. Behind the house, the carriage house has been rebuilt, but it's been rebuilt in the design of the original ones. They would leave Algona at 3 o'clock and to dance and eat supper in Irvington. So I just kind of was imagining this. I mean, on Saturday night, you pack up at 3 o'clock and you take your horse and carriage and drive out. How far is Irvington? Like 8-9 miles, isn't it? So I don't know. So, but it gets even crazier as I read more and more about this. They would dance all night and then come back in the wee hours of the morning. They were pretty wild. I mean, we're talking like 1892 they're doing this. So it's just so wild. The Nicholins moved to California in 1920, and the house was first rented and then purchased by the McEnroes. Patricia was remembered for playing and teaching lessons on her baby grand piano, and it was in the bay window of the house, which is on the other side. And so you can look at the bay window and the carriage house. This house, so that one was built 1888, so, you know, just at the turn of the century. And then this house is built 1920, so almost 40 years later, to just kind of give you the right idea. But it was built in the 20s. It's a Greek Revival Federal house, and you see that squareness of the Federal, and then the Greek Revival. It's a more simplistic design of the 20s, and it's kind of a boxiness. It's kind of response to the Victoria era where they had all that trim and stuff. This is like a nicer look to it. The columns at the front door are Greek Revival, and the Federal influence is a curved pediment over the front door. And unfortunately, I have nothing about the owner at that time, so next time, oh!
The owner was a drainage lawyer that built it.
A drainage?
A drainage.
Drainage lawyer.
Yeah, lawyer for drainage. 'Cause that was
Okay.
a big thing back in the
Okay.
day.
Yeah, and Jeff lives here now, so you probably know more about the house than I do.
And then the Pratt family owned it after that.
Okay.
the electrician.
Okay.
A lot of people probably knew the Frank.
Yeah. So there were a lot of bankers, lawyers, you know, that lived on this street.
I thought I remembered a Harrington. A Harrington.
Oh, did a Harrington own it?
Yeah, for a little while, I think.
Oh, okay.
Not very long.
Okay.
Yeah, if I went through the abstract, I did see that, but not very long.
Okay. Because actually, Sweeting and Harrington, they were in the same office for a while.
Okay.
So that could be, you know, they just lived close. So, and actually, and Sweeting's daughter, May, married, is it Tim Harrington? I'm going to say like T.J. Harrington. I can't remember what his first name is. But he actually married May Sweeting, who lived right over there across the street. There's probably a real love story about that too, you know. He's over here, she's over there. I totally can watch Jeff and Nancy from my house, so maybe May did the same thing. I don't know, but I never thought about that. But yes, they got married, so a little love story going on there. Okay, this is 332 North Thorrington. This is not the original house, but I'm going to tell you about the original two-story that was built here. It was built in 1889, and the house was referred to as the wedding gift house. Dr. Frank and Mrs. Valley Tribon built this house here. The house wasn't quite finished when the couple got married. And they had a beautiful outdoor wedding in West Bend at Valley's parents. Their wedding night was interrupted when Dr. Frank had to deliver his sister's baby, and Valley spent the night at the hotel on State Street. The couple had 5 children, including a set of twins. In 1917-18, the Spanish flu epidemic had the doctor working night and day. Their daughter, Ruth, was married in this house. It was filled with yellow chrysanthemums and ferns. That must have been a pretty wedding. 2 days before their 50th anniversary, the doctor died at age 84. Valley kept the house until she passed on in 1955. She had a woman that came in and stayed with her, and she said that she was always very happy in this house. And I'm not sure when that house was torn down and this house was built, but yeah. A lot of people tell me they remember that house standing there, so, but it's a very pretty house. Yeah, look at those amazing trees. I know. Is that a bur oak? Is that what it is? Oh, okay. Yeah, it's gigantic. Yeah, but that one right there, look at the size on the base. So, all right. We're at 332 North Thorrington. This is the site of Dr. I'm sorry, I'm the wrong one. This Victorian house features an oak foyer and an oak winding staircase, a parlor with a fireplace, a maid's quarters. They had a through from the kitchen to the dining room to serve guests. Richard Palmer worked for the railroad and built this house. During the Depression, it became a boarding house, and postal workers from the Milwaukee line would walk up the hill to stay here overnight. Currently, this house is owned by a gentleman from Texas, and nobody's living in it. But if you did go in it, you can still see the numbers on the door when it was a boarding house. So it's kind of interesting. It's just a gorgeous house. And it has a lot of Victorian features, such as a balcony. Those are all of that Victorian period. And I think it was built 1880, but I couldn't find documentation on that date. So you're going to have to take the Thorington Walk again next year. And maybe I'll have the date by that point. Vicki Mallory from the Chamber, she suggested doing the Thorington Walk. I guess there was one probably 25 years ago. And so we decided to revive it, really at the very last minute. And thanks to, there's a book that was printed up called Picturesque Algona, and I got some of my information from there. And some of it from the library. They do have archives of some of the newspapers. And so I got a lot of information there. And then lots of people were generous with information about these homes. A lot of homeowners and people that remembered, like the sledding hill. I didn't grow up here, so I didn't know about the sledding hill, but a lot of people that took the tour, you know, remember things like that. We just have one more house, and it's 316 North Thorington, and that's called a cut sandstone block exterior. It has a plaster interior, and it's almost identical to one on Main Street of Burt. Some of the windows have beveled glass, and I just don't have a lot of information on that house, so that's all I have. I so want to thank you all for coming out for this walking tour. This morning when I got up, I thought we'd all have umbrellas. The weather just held very nicely for us, and so thanks for coming out. And if you want to head back for wine, I won't be offended.
Thank you.
Oh, you bet, you bet.
Does this garage go with this house? Yeah. Is this the garage?
Yes, but they built that later. They built that later. But it had fairly, somebody told me this was built by a doctor, and it had fairly large grounds originally. So, but I have no idea. And a lot of these houses that were like 1900s, it's hard to think that they would build such large, grand houses, but they had fireplaces and, you know, just a lot of space, a lot of space. So,
And look, you can shoot and have duck for dinner here.
yes. Actually, these are called the Thorington ducks. I'm going to have to talk very quietly about them. They used to let them loose, and they walked all down Thorington and back. And their original ducks would disappear at Thanksgiving time, and then new ducks would show up the next year. But these two are kind of mallards, and one of them is an English mallard, so he's kind of a fancy duck. And a couple years ago, they made their grand escape, and they found them clear down in Veterans Park, trying to jump into the river. So since then, their home has gotten a fence, but they still are the Thorington ducks. And don't tell Harley that we don't allow ducks here. There they are, and they're very friendly ducks, and if you quack at them, they tend to quack back. So they are very people ducks. I mean, they're used to people being around them. I know, it's just kind of fun. And plus, their kids got older, so they couldn't have them disappear anymore. You bet. Yeah, they got too old to.
Well, thank you, Ann.
Ready? Johnny, you're a boy, make your big noise, here in the street, gonna be a big. You got mud on your face, a big disgrace, kicking your cat all over the place, singing beware. Come on, I'll go and do it out, go! Beware. There you go, keep going. Johnny, you're a young man, hard man, shouting in the street, gonna take
That's how it's done, young man. It's all downhill from there, I think. That's right. Thanks for helping us. That's what we do. We take requests, we have fun with it. There's no rules here tonight. There might be rules tomorrow night, but not tonight. More than likely, we ruin the song for you and you never want to hear it again. We do our best. We know a lot of songs, we don't know them all, but some we know better than others.
Shut up! There you go. Of the night, the physical. And dance with me. This woman is my destiny. Help me out. Ooh, sing it. Nice work. Black kiss dress and some beat up sleeves. My discotheque, Juliet, teenage dream. I felt it in my breath. We dancers. Oh, we were bound to be together, bound to be together. She took my arm. I don't know how it happened. We hit the floor and she said, oh, don't you dare look back. Just keep your eyes on me. I said, you're on the back. She said, shut up and dance with me. This woman is my destiny. You ready to sing it? Ooh, what? Back. Just keep your eyes on me. I said you're all back. She said shut up and dance with me. This woman is my destiny. Ooh, shut up and dance. Don't you dare look back. Just keep your eyes on me. I said you're all back. She said shut up. You and me go fishing in the dark, lying on our backs and looking at the stars with a cool grass grow. Down by the river in the full moonlight, we'll be falling in love in the middle of the night. Just on the river and the fish don't bite. Jump in the river and we'll cool ourselves in the heat of the night. Sing it, baby, get ready. You and me go fishing in the dark, lying on our backs and look at the stars when the cool grass grows. Some songs.
Thank you so much to the Algona Chamber of Commerce for bringing us here tonight. They're a fantastic organization. You all know that already, but we have to shout out.
Save myself from falling. I took a chance. Change the way you lie. Is that so going down on me? Bring me my wine. He said we haven't had this period here since 1969. And still those voices are calling from far away. Such a lovely place, such a lovely place. Living it up in the Hotel California. Now touch each other's hands. Come on, touch them. Touching hands. Everybody reach out, do it! Reaching out. Touch yourself. Touching me. What? mind. Bring it! To believe and never roll down. Help me out, ready? I love it at night. Ba, 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 ba. There you go. And it don't seem so long away. Let's get it. And when I heard ba, 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 it just ripping all the dirt out of that flower pot. It's awesome. How can I hurt when I'm with you? He's going to be a future vice president at a bank over there. Touching one. Everybody reach out. Reaching out. Touch yourselves. Touching me. Sing it. I think he found China. Sweet Caroline. Do it. Good times never seem so good. I didn't come. Bring it. To believe and never roll. Everybody bounce up and down. Sing it. Everybody sing it loud. We go. Sweet Caroline. Do it. Good times never seem so good. What? I didn't come. Do it. To believe and never roll. Everybody give me some jazz hands. It's swing. That was awesome. Alright, we're gonna take a short break. You guys go get some drinks. Maybe have somebody go and tell that kid to stop digging dirt out of the giant flower pot. That's pretty awesome. That kid is going to be a manager of a bank. That kid's awesome.